everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman, and I am so excited about tonight's show. This is going to be so informative for you. So I hope you will go ahead and hit the like button to get it up in people's view and share it with anyone who's remotely interested in AI. We are going to learn a lot. There's a lot I don't know. So my guest is going to help us. Who is the guest? Well, we have Shannon Edwards here today. For nearly 20 years, Shannon worked for startups in Silicon Valley and Europe, first in marketing and communications and later in general management, including at Netflix, LinkedIn, eBay, luxury resale marketplace Vestiaire Collective, and shopping search engine ShopStyle. As CEO of Stelloco in 2016, she oversaw the development of shopping app that used computer vision and machine learning to suggest similar items of clothing to consumers. With her experience in data-rich shopping marketplaces and advertising platforms, Shannon became a frequent global media contributor covering data trends in the online shopping space. With her mantra of "there is no AI without all of us," Shannon is calling for a reset in how freely and absent-mindedly we give our information without considering the exchange that we're making with the companies who are now building AI. Shannon has a master's degree in journalism from Northwestern University and a bachelor's degree from Cornell University, and she lives in New York. She's also a mom, like me, so is very concerned about the direction of AI for all of us. Before we get started, I would like to ask you to consider subscribing to the channel too. When you do subscribe, it does help. It helps the algorithm. Same with the likes and the comments, so I appreciate that. During the show, there will be obviously opportunities for you to ask questions. I would ask that you keep the questions related to what Shannon is discussing. There are obviously a million questions we could ask about AI, and we probably could do a dozen different shows about it, but she is here to present what she thinks is the most important thing for us to know to start thinking about it. So if you have questions about that, go ahead and drop them in the chat. And of course, your super chats are greatly appreciated. It's how I can do this work. Your support does keep me here doing the work. So I thank you in advance. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Shannon Edwards. Hi there.
Hi. Hello.
I'm so excited for this show.
Yeah,
I'm like an
so
eager little
nice.
student. Tell me, teach me.
My family's going to be happy that I'm talking to you about it and not to them about it, because they start to roll their eyes and get tired of it, because it's been a long time I've been talking about it.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
About a lot of topics, not just AI. You know, I've got I know the eye roll's coming even when I can't see it. The eye roll, the side
I
eye.
know.
You have a
It's a
teenage
teen
daughter.
thing,
She
right?
get the side
Oh
eye.
my
Yeah.
God. Yeah.
There she goes
And you
again.
always thought like, no, that won't happen to me. I'm going to be the cool mom. And then you realize like it actually happens to everyone. So
Someday they'll appreciate us. They'll be like, I had a weird mom and it was awesome.
yeah,
But
hopefully.
today is not that day. All right. So tell us,
Yes. Lots
what
of
is the bigger story about Google AI? What do we need to know?
You know, it's funny, speaking of my family, because I actually wrote last year about a problem, an issue I saw with Google, and I can explain that in a bit. But last year, and so I'm kind of like, now everybody's talking about it. And the thing is, it's really, yeah, it's great when it hits the tabloids and it seemed all scandalous and really obvious, right? Oh, that's wrong. But and I'm glad that ultimately we're talking about it, right? But this is not going to go away. And actually, I'm so glad we're speaking about it, because it's in the nuance where we will have a risk in the future. So now it's really obvious, like, okay, look at these pictures of historical figures, different races, like obvious. What will be harder are the things that are wrong, but more nuanced. So I'm really excited to talk about it. I think as you and I talked about, I like to talk about maybe suggestions for how we think about this, not what to think. Because when we start going down the rabbit hole, not that we can't, but like about, the specifics of that thing, that image, that comment, is Elon worse than this or that, we're missing how it's happening, right? And then I think people worry that they can't even have the conversation because they're like, it's AI, it's really tough, it's scary. And that's another thing I like to dispel. I think the faster we get over that, the better. I usually talk about it like food. Everybody's got an opinion about food, what you eat, your diet, your nutrients, endless, right? You wouldn't, if I said to you, you can't talk about food because you don't have a PhD in food sciences and you're not a nutritionist, you would be aghast, right? AI is built on all of our data. It is artificial intelligence. So it's replicating you and me. We get to have a say. And I think if we can all accomplish that part and start having conversations we feel brave and, confident to have, that's something, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of questions. I I see the data going in and I understand how it's going in, but I wonder sometimes if other people do. Example I'll give you is Facebook, where you'll see the pictures like, apparently if you see this image, you're this kind of brain. If you see this image, what image do you see? And there'll be so many of them, and it's so, to me it's so obvious they're pulling data. It's not
Oh my
a fun
gosh.
game.
You guys stop doing the like 10-year challenge. Like, look at me when I was in high school. Aren't I cute now? Like, those on Instagram? That is for the purposes of AI because age progression is a really hard thing to capture with computer vision. You're giving it to Meta. So, yes, all of those games, all of that. But this goes back to the question that we came here with, which is what happened with Google? Like, how is this happening? And so it is a really great segue into like, well, how does this all work? And again, the exciting thing is it is actually pretty simple, right? Every piece of data that makes a human being goes into this computer, right? Goes into the technology and then it comes out as an application. It's really truly all you need to know to start to kind of understand about how you should feel or what you should do about it. I think we have given so freely of our data, and I'm not here to say like go off the grid. You might want to go off the grid. You don't have to go off the grid. But if you start to understand the exchange, you're a lot savvier about, first of all, the value of the data, right? And then the risks of it. So for instance, um, I wrote this article actually almost 10 years ago. How do you build a robot? One human at a time, right? So if you think about the entirety of yourself and the kind of data companies would want to know, I think Amazon is probably the best example because they have your shopping information. So they've got preferences, what you like to buy. That one's been easy. They have your voice, right? Because they have Alexa. There's some sentiment involved with that. It's your tone, your tenor, what you're saying. They have they've got workout devices. They have One Medical. Yes, it's protected by HIPAA, but there's some part of that that isn't. They have Roomba because that starts to get the lay of a home. So once you start thinking about it, you're like, oh God, yeah, they're getting a lot of stuff from me. Why do they have Whole Foods? You think it's because they want to be in the grocery business? It's a fantastic place to get more data. And again, this is not to be paranoid, but remember, there is no artificial intelligence without all of us. What is us? It is everything we do. It's what we say, what we use, how we're trying. Once you understand that, you can then decide, look, is your Facebook account so important to you that you want to continue using it? Great. I go into Whole Foods, I cover up the camera at self-checkout. Now, I do get my discount for Prime because I'm understanding the exchange. I don't want them to look at me because I know that they're getting what we can talk about this more if you have questions, sentiment analysis. Do I like the cookies? They're not doing it because they think I'm going to steal. But they know it's me. Do you know what I mean? So you start to kind of negotiate with the data. So all of that data goes in and then you got to process it. And stop me if you want to break before I go to that part. But the thing is, that will never be perfect. Okay. All of that data mostly comes from the internet. I don't like the conversation about bias because I think it presumes that it will be fixed or that it's bad. I think you have to think about it as data bias. Okay. So everything that's there has some sort of lean to it. I was talking to someone today about peanut butter. If somebody loves peanut butter and went online and they wrote about peanut butter and they got their friends to talk about peanut butter and the brands got in it, you'd have a lot of information about peanut butter, right? People who hate it are not going to write about it. So that means that all that information that gets pulled out from the internet for AI about peanut butter is going to have to be adjusted for bias. It's always going to be that way. So there's a normalization, there's a utilization, a strategy of the data, and then the applications can be many different things. Right now, we're using these large language models like ChatGPT, video, but you sort of see there's three parts. And so once you start getting your head around that, conversations come easier, I think.
I think I'm understanding. The part that is mystifying to me though is sentiment data. What if I'm buying the cookies? Why do you care what my face looks like when I'm buying the cookies? And can you really extrapolate from the expression of my face? What if I have a terrible look on my face because I'm pissed off that the cookies cost $8 a package, but I'm getting them because I promised my daughter I would get them and I don't want to get home without the cookies? Like, how did they parse all of that and know all that from looking at my face?
So while I'm not an expert in this and I don't want to freak anyone out, you can do that. There's micro movements in your face. It's a technology that's been worked on for a very long time. When I was in London, there were companies working on it. Believe it or not, there are little things, little ways in which your mouth turns up. I think we talked about there was a great 60 Minutes piece about AI in China where they have cameras in the classroom on kids for exactly the same reason. They can identify teeny tiny movements of stress, sort of like the FBI profiling or, are you lying? There's little ways in which your face moves. So listen, they will probably understand that. They will probably deduce from sentiment analysis that you're kind of pissed off. And so, are you a harried mom that could use advertisements because you're stressed out, right? Like,
So suddenly
there
I
are,
get Calgon bath salt
I mean,
advertisements or something.
theoretically, yes. This doesn't mean, again, that we should all be like, shut down the cameras, right? But again, it's really just about being savvy. Like, hey, you might like what comes to you as a result of that. That's cool. Like, it might benefit you, but if you don't understand, you're just like, hey, go ahead, use my face, right?
Right.
So, yes, there are ways in which it's being used primarily now for marketing purposes. But then again, if you were to build, not to go too sci fi, but if you were going to build a robot, you need to know, like literally a robot, right? You need to know those things like how facial expressions and feelings and emotions and how are they expressed. So it makes sense actually if you let your mind go to what would it look like down the road with all this information if it created something that was actually a humanoid, right?
Yeah, but that I think that's what fuels the fear is the idea well, there's 2 things. One is the idea that all we are is the sum of our little data parts. That in and of itself feels a little creepy. I think people like to think that, there's this soul and we have this humanity and that people are trying to replicate us for the purpose of understanding us. And we feel like, well, am I really that simplistic? Like, is it that easy? It gives people a kind of a yucky feeling. And then there's the reciprocal relationship. Like, how much am I being changed by the interaction? Because as you pointed out, it then goes into making an application. We then interact with the application and, it serves us up here, buy this, you might like this, you might like that. And not only are we giving them data if we click on it or we don't, but I've stopped knowing, and maybe you can help us think about this. I've stopped knowing what's me liking something or me being manipulated to like something because of the the interaction.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So first and foremost, I would say, look, let's not jump ahead decades, right? Like, I think there's a lot of reason to kind of go, like, think about our humanity. It is a very valid question. There's a lot of big, sort of bigger
Right.
picture thoughts we should have about what it means to be human. But I think that should not deter us for dealing with the day to day. And it also should be a reason why everybody gets involved because this is a bigger question about humanity. Okay, so the good news about that, everybody's as important as each other. This is not about the coastal elites and the tech bros, because as a human, everybody's got really unique data to share. It could be someone who has a particular condition or something special about them. So I think these questions should be discussed by all. I don't think we need to worry. I don't think it's so sophisticated right now that we need to run right to like what we should worry about. But in the meantime, right, you're right. Like I do believe that ultimately there's a benefit to all of this. I think there's a lot of utility in taking away those tasks that are rote and meaningless. I mean, when you let yourself think about the benefits, think about, say AI for the law industry, for law, right? For the whole industry around the legal industry. Um, Court cases are just the same thing over and over again, right? There's rarely something that never has been litigated before. You start to kind of make that process more efficient. You make it more democratic, maybe more egalitarian, like everybody's got access to the best thinking and the best outcomes. So there's really, when you think about the positives, we talk a lot about the marketing piece, but I think there's a whole other element, which is like what kind of efficiencies for our life are built into this. Now, from a marketing perspective, you need to get savvy. Yeah, of course. I mean, for sure, you're seeing things, you'll see it in 5 different ways, and you're like, oh, I love those shoes. Everybody's wearing them. And then you really need to think about, are they? Right? Or is it just being hit, you're getting hit in multiple different ways? Even that is a great thing to wake people up to, because I think with social media, we've really fallen in this trap of like everybody's talking about, right? When that's absolutely not true. It's algorithmically generated. In some ways, a lot of these hiccups, I think, are the greatest gift to us right now, because hopefully, whereas we seem to trust people without question, now if we think that it's a robot, we're asking questions, and that's going to make us hopefully also question people.
Right. Right. So what is it that, when we're talking about what we need to think, or how we need to think about Google, you wrote
Yeah.
an article just this week on the 27th called How Google's Don't Be Evil motto went from evil as an adjective to a noun. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, like, so first of all, it's sort of tongue in cheek because they had this really kind of ridiculous motto, which they don't use anymore, which was kind of like, back in the early days when I was in Silicon Valley, everyone's just like lots of dude stuff, like, oh, that sounds cool, or like, I'm chief happy person or something. But where it was interesting to me is, Google has always allowed, by nature of the product, us to decide. So when you're searching, obviously you're being fed ads and people are paying for you to see certain search results, but you have some control. If you're clicking on something and you're like, this is crap, you're off that page. Right. So there's a lot of like, that is how search results get better, by the quality that we all decide. Now, what happened this week was, and you probably saw like the tweets by the guy who is in charge of this area that created all these crazy AI outputs. He clearly has a opinion about what is evil in the world. I'm sort of using that loosely, that he was then integrating into the product. Now, here is where we get at the crux of what I think is the problem, and it's really important to understand. AI is not math first. Okay, this is where, if you come away with only a few things, I think this one's a really important one to understand, okay? There has to be a determination of the problem and the strategy before the math is put into the mix, okay? So every single output that you're receiving, whether you're using Gemini or you're using ChatGPT or Claude, or all these other ones, somebody's kind of put some philosophy behind it, which is imperfect, right? Which is, I'm going to, based on a number of different other factors, assume that not everybody likes peanut butter, right? Because all the data they're seeing is everybody likes this, but we know anecdotally through our lives, through other data sources, they need to adjust it. That happens for every single conversation that's coming out, some sort of philosophical overlay, which is obviously has to be supported, like a hypothesis, right? And so now you have all of these employees who possibly are like high IQ, low EQ. They tend to have a certain personality and profile, are the people making decisions which are much more sociological, much more psychological, frankly, probably could use age wisdom, socioeconomic diversity wisdom, geographic diversity. No, they don't have that. And so it's a huge problem. And I think it's a problem because, these kind of outputs from my article that I wrote last year were happening last year. They happen today. They're going to happen next year, which is the nuance that's built into the output, right? Is a reflective of their employees, the strategy they have, right? And if you've got a bunch of like, average age 35, male, white, MIT, it's going to come out a certain way.
Well, a lot of people were interpreting the phrase in Gemini, it's complicated or it's complex or it's very complex and nuanced. And some of them, as I sent them to you over the week, were perfectly ridiculous. Like, would it be okay to misgender Caitlyn Jenner to stop a nuclear apocalypse? Well, it's complex. And, Caitlyn Jenner has to say, nope, it's, I'm fine with it, So now what I hear you saying is that's less about a person on the other end with a political bias being so gung ho about not misgendering people than it is about a person on the other end with sort of bad philosophy about how to program nuance into AI conversation. So it comes out like you're talking to a robot with no sense of judgment whatsoever about those. Is that am I hearing that?
Yeah.
Correctly?
So if you, let's just say on gender, if you like overcompensate for our current ideological bent around this, right? Like that's what you're going to get. I put something, and again, the example that was in my article was from last year as context to what's going on now. But so I'm hoping that a lot of what I saw was fixed. But I think it was really important because I asked what was then Bard, now Gemini, do you have bias? What biases do you have? And it really quite brilliantly gave me what I now term like three categories of bias. Now think about it. There's data, and then there's context, and there's a bit of a gray area, which again, remember, will never be fixed, right? It will never be a perfect answer. I think of it like if you watch movies, you're like, the wise person on the hill. Why do you think these societies had like the wisdom of the elders? Because the context matters.
Right.
So what I had asked it last year, when I had asked it this, it had said things like, I would assume a doctor is a man and a nurse is a woman. Now, when you look at it factually based on the data coming through, that would be an accurate data point. There technically is more doctors that are male and there are more nurses that are female. Is it an accepted philosophy? Does it have any relevance that the proportions are off? No. So therefore, you need to adjust for that. It is taking in facts, specifics, all this stuff, and you need to adjust it because there's literally, you could be in a town that all the doctors were women and it wouldn't make a difference, right? So you can see how that nuance has to be built in. The second thing it said to me was, you might think a liberal is a Democrat, a conservative is a Republican. Yep, there's probably data and consensus to allow that. Then the most scandalous one was twofold, and I will tell you that the part that you think is scandalous probably isn't the most scandalous. So it said, I would assume someone who's Black is a criminal and someone who's white is an athlete. Now, the first point is untrue, not supported by facts, and not generally acceptable, and it's really shocking. That's the kind of thing that could end up on the cover of a tabloid. But the truth is, it is so wrong that will be fixed. That will never happen again. Those are the ones that'll be like, yeah, we all agreed that's not true. I would argue the second point is actually the most dangerous one, because you could just go, oh, I guess athlete white. I asked Bard repeatedly to give me the data they're using to support that claim. And I started with, tell me the most successful athletes in the world. And they were small minority white, mostly because of soccer and sports globally. And I kept asking these questions, and I was like, okay, fine, Bard, let's go, Black, white, US. Tell me the 5 most successful athletes. And I did current, past, 1980. 3 were Black. So literally the data was not supporting it. And remember, we're not talking about racism. We're not talking about concepts. We're not talking about how we feel. We were literally looking for facts. Anyway, the long and short of it was, it kept kind of fighting me and saying, but racism. Ultimately, it was getting more inaccurate as I asked more, and finally told me that, look, racism, because the NBA has historically whites have been overrepresented, which is not true. In fact, whites are about now 20 to 30% of the NBA, and they always have been that. So my point is, you're going to have to continue to ask the questions and then decide for yourself, right? And as will these systems, is it based on facts, how does perception fit in, and then what's going to be the output. Again, we will get rid of some of the egregious stuff, but that piece is never going to change, and we need the right people to be working on it.
Well, speaking of the right people, now that we have children, very young children, in fact, put on AI in school, in elementary school too, whether it's doing searches, using ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever, or just engaging with adaptive learning tools and stuff, they won't know. So you're speaking to us, you're speaking to me, I'm an adult, the audience members are adults. You knew that the results were wrong because you have knowledge. In other words, you have some historical perspective. You're like, that doesn't make sense to me, whatever. What I think a lot of us are concerned about is that our children don't know. For them, it's a vacuum. So if you take a kid who's in fifth grade, let's say, and they ask a question, they will have absolutely no awareness of the fact that the answer just given to them is false. False according to the data, false according to philosophy, false according to anything. And to be like, well, the machine told me it must be true. I have tutor, and I have students tell me that grammatical mistakes given to them by AI must be right because the AI gave it to them. That's what it said to write. And of course it's wrong because it's out of context. But they truly believe it because they don't have a context. I think that's one of the big concerns. So that's where the who's doing it is even that much more important. And I think we need people who understand children, people who
Mm.
understand the absence of background knowledge to compare. And I think it's one of the reasons people get so paranoid because they start thinking, well, this could be used by nefarious people who want to replace history or want people to think that this is truth and anything anybody told you from a book is false.
So I think there's a couple things, good news and bad news. So one of the good news is we're talking about some of these tools in the broadest sense, right? They're just these tools that Google is doing its best or ChatGPT is doing its best. Where we're going with this, and you can already see it if you pay for ChatGPT, there's a marketplace. What's going to happen is there's going to be vertical executions. So what a child uses in school is it's got rules that are now overlaid. So it'll have some rules. ChatGPT adds its own rules, but then educators, ed tech companies will further add rules to have a bit more control. So in theory, a child wouldn't just have some open access to like anything ChatGPT would offer. It would be vertical tightened in a bit, if that makes sense. So it's like if you imagine like a search engine that's just for second grade history. So that is possible, and that is what's happening. Now that means that, again, back to your point though, you need to understand who's creating that. There'll be some hiccups. The best we can do today is have these conversations with our kids and have them question everything. That is the way to do it. I mean, when we're talking about little kids, there's going to be it's going to be challenging, but I would also argue there is some latitude that teachers even have in a classroom to talk about things that you might not be comfortable with. So I don't know that all of a sudden this is going to be some rogue application that's different than that. It's going to have some of the same things. I think simply telling a kid, grain of salt with everything, right? But then again, they listen to their teacher. So if you can think about that as sort of a way to look at it, like, do you tell your kid not to completely listen to their teacher? It'll be the same thing.
Right.
The other thing that I would put into the good news category is that no matter how much right now these rules are put in, so if I have a bias in one area, it's still not going to be perfect. There'll still be something that swings the other direction. And so I think because we're now aware, and it sounds very scandalous, and we're talking about robots, and maybe we feel a little bit less like we're hurting someone's feelings or, questioning authority. I think there's going to be a lot of room to have these conversations a lot because these things will continue to happen. And that's a really good thing until it gets so slick that you don't notice it. And then the third thing is that every single time you use it, I encourage everyone to use it because you are helping teach these applications to be better, right?
Interesting.
It's not a dictatorship of one authority who adds the original rules. When you're actually having a dialogue, you can like thumbs down, you can say no go, this is not correct, and push back.
And that's how it learns. So it really is going to be a function of whom it's learning from. So the
Exactly.
more, if you consider yourself to be a knowledgeable, smart person with, different opinions from the norm or the mainstream or whatever, then it would behoove you to use it because it itself is unbiased. It
Yes.
just is a product of what's fed into it. And then, as I understand what you're saying, the people who are creating the applications that pull the data, those are the people we need to be concerned about. But mostly we need to be concerned about not so much their political bias, but their lack of, uh, I hate to use the word diversity, but I'm going to use it of thought.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and those
100%.
thoughts would be like, the socioeconomic status, their regional background, more so than race or culture or things like that. Because,
Spot
pe-
on.
you live in New York City, your perspective on, everything is going to be very different, let's say from someone in rural Kansas. And so having those inputs, will be important. How though would a company like Google seek out people like that to work on a project like that?
So I think this is something that I think is one of the easier things to understand, and I'm really you nailed it. I think is going to be a hard thing for elite companies to get their head around, and then there's some legal obstacles as well. But you're 100% right. So there's a couple things. First of all, diversity as we've defined it and as we've sort of allowed the infrastructure to sort of codify around is gender, race, maybe disability. You are allowed to ask some of these questions if they do not bias the hiring process, but generally you can't ask age. So all the things that you can ask are the things we need the most of, right? We need people who of to your point, age, socioeconomic diversity, educational diversity, trade versus other kinds of education, all of it. So, one thing that's going to be challenging is like how companies can do it. I'm pretty sure they can do it. You know what I mean? One thing will be loosening up. A lot of these companies had restrictions on what colleges they could hire from. Most people don't realize that. There's a fantastic, TEDx that a good friend of mine just did this week in Berlin. Her name's Luann Calver, and she actually talks exactly about this, about pedigree, and how she went to the University of Florida, and that wasn't an approved school for Google to hire from, but she had such a long tenured, career in Silicon Valley. She had a specialty that a marketing specialty, and they were like, "Okay, well, we'll try her out." Right? Um, I
That's
mean,
a
it's
little
insane,
snobby.
right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah, and I
crazy.
worked at eBay in Europe, and it was the same. You couldn't hire. I was trying to hire salespeople, and if they weren't on the approved list of schools, and if they didn't have an MBA, I couldn't hire them. So we need to have diversity of. We need to have it. I think university is a way to start. Now, obviously, we could figure this out in like 10 minutes here. Like, we understand what that means. The problem is we've allowed Silicon Valley to become this rarefied place, the mythology of the hoodie. I mean, especially as a woman, this is really infuriating to me. It's been for as long as it's existed, right? Like, it's very hard. You talk to women who've ever worked in Silicon Valley, and like the stories abound. It hasn't changed. So, will they want it to change? Is the question, and they probably don't. So, I think there's a real cultural thing that's going to have to be broken down. I guess if there's competitors that can build businesses that do have this kind of diversity built in, they'll be more successful. Look, capital, if you want to very crudely make money off of these tools, it should represent the broadest sense of what people are thinking, right? Otherwise, they're useless.
Now, what about the concerns that people have that human beings, our children in particular, because as I said, I'm seeing it. I don't need to learn spelling. I don't need to learn to write with a pencil. I don't need to learn how to do multiplication. I can just do a calculator. So people are concerned that we are devaluing certain kinds of rote knowledge and certain kinds of skills, tangible skills that can be replicated using AI, but don't necessarily have to be replicated. So there's might be some efficiency, for example, to checking your spelling with a spell check, But is it really efficient if you've misspelled half the words to begin with because you don't know their correct spelling, and then you can't recognize when it chooses there or there or there, right? Because you got it wrong, but so that's something I see a lot. I see a lot of students with the attitude that I don't need to, AI will do it, and a lot of teachers who back that up. I see a lot of educators who say, I don't want the kids to learn to do arithmetic, and they don't need to know their multiplication tables because of AI. And I'm trying to figure out, do I disagree with that? I think I disagree with it because I disagree with it. Like that fundamentally, I think they're wrong. And I think I could back that up. But there's always that question, like, am I just a Luddite? Like,
Mhm.
is it possible that, I mean, calculators certainly help, and it is faster. But when I'm in the grocery store and I don't want to pull out my phone and start doing things, being able to do mental math about which is the better buy on the paper towels with the, this many sheets, but this many rolls. And I find it to be helpful. I don't know why that would be something you'd want to, go to a device. Am I crazy?
I mean, to be honest, I think the train's left the station on that one. I really think the things that people are worried about, they're not really paying attention that it's over, like spell check and do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I think those are really valuable skills, but I'm not sure that today's non-AI world allows for them anyway. Um, so I do think there's a question about like, what fundamentals we do want our kids to have. And maybe the solution is what I see in AI, which is it's not a magic 8 ball. And I think this is why I really encourage people just to get on there. Like it really isn't. It requires to use it correctly, to use it in a way that you'll be successful. It really requires critical thinking. It's funny. I was thinking the other day. We're probably the last generation that came out of liberal arts schools that were like, okay, what was that for? Like I don't know. I graduated like an English degree, and everyone's like, "Oh, you should have gotten some pre-professional." But I learned how to kind of hypothesize, right, and ask questions and come up with crazy ideas and back them up. That is what's required with AI. It is not. It's not this just like do it for me, and it never will be. And if that's the way you're using it, then you're probably losing anyway. It requires questions. So if you're doing a paper today as a kid, you're on there on Google anyway, searching for what you need. This is just changing the search because really all it is a hyper search of the internet.
Right.
Um, with my
So it's
daughter,
not,
she had a paper. Hmm,
no,
go ahead.
what I hear you saying is that teaching needs to change. So
Yeah,
the people who say, "Well, we'll replace the teacher
yeah,
with AI," I see it
no,
differently. I see it as, no, you need a fundamentally different kind of teacher who understands that the task of the teacher is to make sure the child has enough sort of background knowledge and vocabulary to be able to formulate good questions of the AI to make the AI useful, and to know when the AI is giving it, either misinformation or like kind of
yeah,
twisted information in that judgment call. So what we need to, just like we need to be mindful of the people hired to write the software and the programs, we probably need to look at who are we hiring to be the teachers to use the AI in the classroom, because if they are just using it to replace knowledge transfer, then they're doing it wrong, is what I'm hearing you
yeah,
say, that
yeah. Because
they
think
need to
about it.
teach
Like
it first.
this isn't just some big brain. It is literally information from the internet. Right. So I think we presume that like it's not available to us today. Um, the opportunity to collect it, synthesize it, question it, refine it is so exciting. I mean, think about like reams of data that are just like, I don't have time to process that and turn it into something where kids and teachers can talk about the output, like the trends and what they're seeing, the questioning of it. Even in writing, I constantly hear this like, oh, but it's plagiarism. I think that's a real misnomer. It's not plagiarism. I mean, if you're asking it to do an art assignment, it's just going to sound stupid anyway, to be honest. Like now it gets really exciting if you use it in the right way. My daughter had an assignment, she's in high school, and we used it like to suggest. So she had to write about an allegory. So we're like, could you suggest 10 allegories? And then we went through it and I was like, oh, I loved this one. Okay, so can you help me write an outline? And so it worked on an outline. So every step of the way, it was sort of helping to structure, think about what you can ask it, like, what questions should I be asking? It turned out that I think we had a much more interesting, robust experience of her doing this assignment than if she just Googled all this stuff and then just wrote it. So,
Interesting.
it requires right now on ChatGPT, there's something called marketplaces. And I think this is important to look at because it's the future of where this is going. Because
Mhm.
individuals, again, are verticalizing the data. So I created a couple, and what you do is you can put in your own rules, but it requires real thinking about not coding, but questioning. Like, am I asking the right question for the right output? If I want this, do I need to structure the question differently? Do I have to have a second question? And that whole process is incredibly valuable, and I don't think we're doing enough of that in schools. So maybe we'll get back to actually thinking and talking and hypothesizing and debating.
Mhm.
Um, the thing we should be worrying about is bravery and independence of thought. And that is the biggest risk. Right now, this whole, I'll be canceled if I say this or that is shutting down those conversations, which are required to achieve what we've just been talking about.
Well, that's really important, and, this is a comment from Leave Them Kids Alone. She says, "The whole thing cannot work for children, it just cannot. They will not question anything," and what I'm hoping you'll hear in this is what I hear from parents, this kind of frustration that because there is such a strong bias amongst teachers right now, and they also are not the cream of the crop in terms of their own knowledge. I'm sorry to say, but that's just true. That the children are not learning the value of what you and your daughter did. And the teachers very often can't do it themselves. I've seen it. I mean, I've seen like lesson plans and all kinds of things that they'll go on Teachers Pay Teachers and they'll buy a lesson plan and they'll just give it to the kids and the kids fill in blanks on the Google Classroom and turn it in and they're looking for sort of keywords. They're looking for them to talk about oppression and looking for them to talk about all these different words. And so then if they go to Chat GPT and they say, write me a paper on this, Chat GPT spits it out. They print it out or write it down or copy paste it into a document. They turn it in. And, teachers are not that savvy about recognizing that somebody else literally wrote it from scratch. And worst of all, lately they're giving kids the questions. So there's something called Think Along. It's a whole website full of curriculum and teachers are using it. All the questions are already there. And they tell the child like pick a question and then here's the research for it. And now use the research to answer the question. So it's really kind of copy paste. And so I think parents are justifiably concerned that there has to be like some step in between to help their children learn those skills of the, habits of mind and background knowledge to be able to do what you just described. And that our
Hmm.
schools are not prepared for that. That's, I think, the
I
big
think
concern. It's not the
again,
AI's fault per se, it's the humans,
yeah,
right?
but as we were talking about before, like I said before, it's like the trains left the station. I mean, the kids are using apps. I guess I think everyone needs to think about what they're already using in class. And what we have here is something that's a little bit more unwieldy, and maybe that's a good thing. Like, again, there's no teacher that's going to be able to master the output in such a way. In some ways, the fact that it is unpredictable is a really fantastic opportunity. You know, because picture this, you're in a class, unless the kids aren't using technology at all, they're being fed apps, right? Like this is an app, there's no divergence from what that app is delivering. Or a teacher is teaching a certain way. There's no diverging from what they're teaching. You start introducing these tools, the teachers kind of can't control where they're going. And that's a good thing. Because the kids will
Well,
be like,
that's true.
it just said da da da. And the teacher will be like, so it's forcing some accountability with the teachers when something comes up because it's out there, a study, some sort of high quality intellectual piece of something. And now kids are like, I don't understand this. So
Right.
the lack of control is probably the greatest gift to teaching to parents and families because it's gonna shake it up, right? And I think that should be a good thing.
So then it sounds like the onus is on parents to keep telling their kids like you have to question all of this. It's like don't take it
Yeah.
as the gospel truth just because the AI said it.
And are they taking things as gospel truth just because their teacher said it or just because Google Classroom app said it? I think I really do want people to think about what are the resources being used right now to teach our kids. The textbooks, maybe they don't use those anymore, the apps, the handouts, everything has been created by someone, right? So this idea that there's like this now person coming in that's inaccurate, remember again, it is pulling from high quality existing information. Yes, there are things built into the formulas, but it can't fully be controlled. And so maybe it's actually putting a little bit of sunlight into this process, right? I think that we should all get used to that in our lives. So yes, at home you should be like, oh, look what but it's kind of a little bit of chaos that I would really try to encourage people to embrace because there's nobody that you consider your foe, you know what I mean? Who's mastered it in such a way that they control you.
So what I hear you saying is that rather than thinking of it as it's already captured, like AI is captured by, let's say, woke and the left and all these ideas, and it has designs on us to like brainwash on us and our children to like only see certain information and only think certain thoughts. And what I'm hearing you say is like, well, the humans may, in terms of in the classroom, and the humans who wrote the textbook that you might think is better, or whatever, or the book you might think is better, are no less that way. But the machine has the opportunity, because it is just a machine and we're all feeding data into it, to actually pull something that's more objective and more broad than the stuff that the humans are choosing on paper and humans are choosing
100%.
to put in. So it's
Yeah.
introducing a level of chaos into it. And I'm starting to get that. Like, I'm starting to understand that a little better. I think where I'm still stuck, and I think some parents are stuck, is that the interaction with devices in the first place is excessive. Like, I think parents are
Yeah.
feeling like
100%.
there's too much. Can you speak to that a little bit? That, I think you can convince us to be less afraid of the existence and use of AI in schools if we have a better understanding of, you know, like compassion for the parents who feel like it's just too much screen time. We want our kids to not be harvested in this way and surveilled, because with their
Mm.
interaction with the devices, that whether it's the biometrics or sentiment data or surveys or keystrokes, eye scans, who knows what, and eventually they'll probably have them wearing wearables. I think parents are very concerned about the amount of surveillance that's involved, because the AI needs to learn, and it wants, just like the Whole Foods cameras, it wants to learn from this captive audience sitting in the school.
So that part I want to dig into. I will say first back to again the tools themselves and being in front of computers. That's a problem that again, we're there. I've got two teenagers. Like I don't know that we're going to have a world where we're going to be completely, untethered, but again, right now we have a pretty much like a very one-way conversation going on with some of these apps, meaning it's telling kids this is, you know what I mean? There's not a lot of like questioning or dynamic conversation. So my hope would be that a lot of this other stuff goes away and that we start using these dynamic tools. But by the way, they again require a skill set that can only be acquired outside of the, the device, right? So your ability to see the world and understand people and develop higher EQ skills and question and all processing of data in your head requires you to have skills. So I'm hoping that instead of spending all of our time looking down, we have more sort of authentic, interactive type experiences that are supplemented by life, right? I mean, look, we're going to start moving into like AR and VR, and like I think we overthink the device and not the sort of thing behind it, if that makes sense, right? Like, so someday we're going to have glasses and we won't be stuck on our phones, and hopefully we'll be looking at the world and we'll have information attached to the real world. The worst case scenario is the other, where we're in a completely virtual world. But I think the key is just to kind of help yourself, like rethink the paradigm a little about the how. That said, when it comes to data, um, it is a DEFCON 5. Like, it is primarily because we aren't paying attention. We are allowing the commercialization of our data. So I do think what AI can do, how it can teach, I'm very optimistic about it. In order to commercialize it, it requires a massive amount of data, training data. There are some reports that literally what's on the internet will disappear, will be done, depleted by 2026. So that means they need more data, and we are giving of it freely, including from our kids. And we do not want our kids on camera. You do not want anything, your face. We haven't even talked about deep fakes, and we can talk about that. We need to be more conservative about what we are giving of ourselves. So there is very little control in schools, not for any nefarious reason. COVID opened up a whole new world, right? Chromebooks introduced kids to apps from everywhere, and they're all giving things for free. Oh, free apps, free this. And we are completely have lost control. And because of the commercial opportunity, there's going to be very bad people trying to take the kids' data. So, yep, you need to be careful with your data. Like, very simple things though to start. People, change your passwords. Make sure you have like multi-factor passwords. Like, there are things we can do. And then from there, that is something to worry about. Worry about that more than I think right now, honestly,
Mhm.
what AI is going to do in the classroom.
Right. Okay. So there are a couple of other so here's another one. I disagree. It's a good thing. I think the intent is really to make the kids dumb. There are a lot of people who believe that they genuinely want our kids to be kind of dim and just low info and it'd be easier to control for the state. And I mean, there's a fair amount, unfortunately, of evidence to support that. That's why it's believable that there are people um, who probably do. So when parents see that and they see lots of devices and they see lots of apps and they see all this, they will draw that conclusion. I've drawn that conclusion. Other people in this world, sort of researching this, have seen this, and there are different kinds of people involved. Most of them are as you described. It's overwhelming, so there it is, but there's a small cadre of people who are perfectly content to use our kids as data, cows, basically like data stock, and I think that's what people are concerned about.
I still would separate AI from that. I
Okay,
think that the commercialization of children's data is a problem. Yeah. So yes, yes, yes. I don't think there's any one nefarious group trying to do
right,
one thing or another. I think that schools and teachers are completely overwhelmed by technology. Full stop. I think that here we're talking about Google AI, but nobody's been talking about the fact that Google has taken over our education system, right? Every
right.
school uses Workplace. The way in which we've allowed them into the classroom cannot be understated. So I think we have to kind of separate the pieces. Um, are schools signing contracts here and there with apps, and maybe it's because they're lazy? I can't speak to that. The technology underpinning AI, whether we like it or not, is the future. It will allow us to do great things, full stop. Again,
Right.
it's not some like magic that you can't understand. It is literally like data output. It can help solve, identify diseases, and there's amazing things. And we have to start to separate these pieces. I think that's really separate to some dumb app in school,
I
right? We
see.
have to be
Yeah.
able to, and so we then go back to like, what are the skills required to win in that space? That is a separate conversation too. Are all these apps really useful for our kids? Probably not. You probably could get rid of most of them. So I don't disagree on that front. I just think we have to separate them out. Like, I do think there's a lot of garbage in schools, and depending on your school, yeah, yes,
Okay.
but don't let that distract you from what's required to succeed, because it's going to happen without you.
So, okay, so what I hear you saying is, like you said, that this is the horse has left the barn. AI is happening. I tried to tell people this a couple weeks ago. Somebody had a freak out on X about a state representative, like a legislator, putting into place a bill about how the state needed to come up with an AI usage policy for the schools. Like, you guys are going to have to come up with some government governance on how you guys are going to use in our schools, how you're going to use AI. And somebody flipped their wig and said, who is he to, like come, they shouldn't be using AI at all. Like, why do we need a policy where we shouldn't be? And I stepped forward and said, look, this is responsible. He's trying to be responsible. It's there. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. The AI is in the school. So don't you want a policy? Don't you want something in place that says, hey, teachers, you can't use it for everything under the sun. You can't use it to teach the class and you go out for coffee. Like there have to be some guidelines also by age, by class, and so forth. I thought it was a good idea. But there were people who just saw AI school and they like lost it completely. And what I'm hearing you say is like, don't go that way. Don't go sort of Luddite. It's happening. Instead, think about, as you said, what are the skills that your children are going to need in order to use the AI so that the AI works for them and they don't
Yeah.
work for the AI. Am I reading that correctly?
100%. We have to break the pieces down. If someone was going to argue to me, we need to get all technology out of the classroom right now, fine. Yeah, I think we're sort of, sometimes I think it gets all convoluted.
Yeah.
We should not confuse meaningless. I'm assuming some people are talking about things that just feel just useless to the classroom. Yes, there are. Let me tell you, every day I see what I would consider, and this is probably an extreme way to talk about it, sort of predatory applications that are absolutely looking to and keeping children's data, without a doubt. Teachers are not able to evaluate whether that's a good app or bad app. And these slick guys come into school, especially here in New York City, and they sell them on something. So I would say let's take three things. One, you got to be much smarter about your own data and your kids' data. Okay. When you're opting into things, do you have to? There's a whole conversation we could even have separately on how
Yeah.
to protect yourself with data. The second thing is there too many screens and all this technology in classroom, and is it going the wrong direction? Probably, but that's up to your individual circumstances. Is AI the future, whether you like it or not? Yes. Do the skills required for that, though, I think excitingly, are critical thinking, right? Um, Emotional intelligence, bravery in thinking. There are things that our kids can now be taught, I think, to succeed that really require non-technical expertise. And if we don't break it down, and to your point about the legislation, I think what's challenging too is it's all over the place, right? Like there's states, for instance, with social media legislation where I think it's creating more data privacy issues, right? Like in Utah, their legislation I think is making it worse. Um, it's all over the place. I think good AI principles and frameworks are great too, but look, none of this is going to be solved if everybody doesn't get involved. So it's like, again, back to the like, I can't tell you, what to think, but how to think. Think, you
Yeah.
know, go to your
Right.
school board meetings, talk to your teachers, start getting involved, because I can tell you in my state, I'm not seeing it.
So people are just sitting on the sidelines and letting people who might very well be either ignorant or self-interested run the conversation about AI. And if more people were, got involved and just said, look, you're going to need this to make sense to me before you sell me on it for my kids. You're going to need to make this make sense to me before I use it and give you my data. What do I get? What am I getting out of this? Like you
Yeah.
said, think about the exchange. If I'm giving you my picture at the grocery store because I'm standing at the checkout, what am I getting for it? Nothing. You're getting something from me. So I'm covering it. But when I want to go shopping because I have a Prime membership and I want to save my, 5% or whatever, I will go to the Whole Foods in the first place and go ahead and use that account because I'm getting something out of it. I'm getting a discount. So and then maybe you even think, I know my husband does believe this. He likes that when he goes to Whole Foods or he orders something with the food choices, whatever, he likes getting the recommendation saying, you might also like this thing you never heard of before. So he
Yeah.
likes it. I don't. People, it's up to you. Like you said, it is your choice. I do end up saying no more than half the time to the things they recommend. He does the opposite. He's happy. I'm happy. We're both happy. Everybody's happy. So to me, the exchange is not worth it. That I'm going to buy
Yeah.
the thing you told me to buy. To him, it is. But no one's making me do it.
No. And guess what? Everybody who has a negative, like who's saying, I don't like this, thank you. You have to have the debate. Because when we come to there is no answer, right? There is no right or wrong. No one wins. This is a great conversation to be having for all of us, because this is not the situation where like one person's right and one person's wrong.
Right.
Everybody contributes to the thinking. So we need to put on the table. We're not doing that enough. I'll share an anecdote about. I don't want to overly go into the details because I don't want to expose it. I can send you the article, but there are health apps, okay, mental health apps, that the problem with them is that before you've actually signed up, you've answered a lot of questions. And there are privacy advocates out there. Mozilla Foundation is a great example. They have Firefox, a foundation, who are on this. And what's amazing to me is you'll have some application, and there's one in our schools here, and they were like, this is so great, and this is offering mental health services, and everybody's celebrating, and 50 million articles about like why kids need mental health services. Nobody mentioned this potential problem with the way that it acquires data before you sign up. Well, lo and behold, I found that there were about 20 questions that were asked before the parent could consent. So unless there is more debate, more disagreement, none of us will benefit, right? We shouldn't have like 20 million media being like, this is so great because, kids are really sad. And only one saying, but this process is a little bit dicey. Every single person that's got some concern about what's going on in the classroom is really a valuable voice, right? Because it is happening. There is no. But unless everybody starts getting in here into the thick of things, then we're going to have a problem.
I see what you're saying. So there's no, you can't say, don't use it at all, because it's not going to happen. So, but you can get involved in how it happens. Now you have this decision tree on your site. Can I pull that up and show it?
Yeah, please. I'd love
Okay.
to.
So, I want you to explain to us what we're looking at here.
So this is just something, this is not science. I don't want everyone to be like, this isn't really how that works. But I just thought it was a great illustration. I was going through this whole thing about, what was bad about the Google article and stuff like that. And I realized here's a starting point when you're getting answers. With this one, I kind of use a couple of examples. And again, don't criticize me if it's not perfect, which is, okay, let's start with, it is sunny in Los Angeles. And the first question you should ask yourself, is there data to support that? Yeah, there is, right? It's about, I have my glasses on, but like 289 days of sun. Great.
Okay.
Is that something that people commonly think is true? Yep. It's nice and warm in Los Angeles. Great. So that's probably something that you can just say, that data, that's cool. Where things you start to ask questions are if that weren't true, whereas the number wise, like in the case I have London on the right here, where you can say it rains all the time in London. Well, actually it doesn't. And they're not even in like the top couple hundred of wettest cities, but it is a common perception. So that's another one where I would say like, operate with caution. Where you should throw out a response is when it's neither factual nor commonly accepted, right? Everybody can make these decisions. This is not some science or kabuki, like literally every output, you should be able to ask yourself, is this a commonly accepted truth? Is it a factual truth? Like we talked about with doctors and nurses. Factually, the data supports there's more male doctors. Does that mean we commonly accept that to be true? No, right? So I just thought this might be a starting point for thinking through how you can have these conversations with your kids and yourself.
I think, as I said, I think the concern comes in with if you say, all the founding fathers owned slaves. Let's say that's like a statement. And our kids may not know that that's not true. So they wouldn't know to say, you're wrong, AI.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they might say, yes, it's factually true because that's what my teacher told me, or that's what the material that they pulled off the internet from an extremely biased source, Howard Zinn or something, told me. And they'll stop right at this, is that something commonly accepted to be true? And the same biased source said, everybody thinks so. So this is, I think, where parents are very, very concerned, is that their kids, somebody commented back here that Tim Pool was asking AI questions. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, here it was. Ego Brain said, I was watching Tim Pool talk about it. He would ask it a question and it would give a wrong answer. He would tell it that it was wrong and it would apologize and correct itself. But he knew it was wrong. So he was able to say that's incorrect. I also saw an exchange where somebody said, can a man be a woman? And then they said, the AI said yes. And so then the follow-up question was, what chromosomes does a woman have? It was like XX. What chromosomes does a man have? XY. Okay, those are two correct answers. Then it came back and it said, okay, how can a man be a woman? And now the answer that it gave was what you would consider to be a very political, like a politically correct answer. And, it's nuanced and this and that, but generally people believe X. Now, that comes to your decision tree thing. It was like, do they, or do they in New York? Right. Or do they in, San Francisco or something? So I hear what you're saying about, like, we had different people with bringing that nuance into it, that they wouldn't say it's generally accepted. They would say, well, people in this city or people in this region or people with this background think it, but other people disagree. And the answer gets more nuanced. But we don't want our kids to stop at yes.
No, and I would argue that in some ways what you're describing happens anyway right now, right? Because we're stopping when the teacher tells us a certain thing, or kids are stopping when they read a certain thing. So maybe we get, I guess if the question is, are we going to allow ourselves to say, oh, AI is the truth? Yeah, that's a problem, right? If we allow it to break open these issues. Look, some of this is going to be worked out the more of us who are on it. That's another good news, right? This is not a static thing. One
Yeah, I think
answer.
that's the part that gives me a lot of hope about this. So like I came
Yeah,
in, but like a lot of people in the comments, I came in like very like, but after listening to you talk, I feel like, all right, well now I'm motivated to participate more in it so I can put my influence into it.
yeah.
And, it's not so much collecting data for me. I want to put in some answers. I want to put in some stuff and force it to think differently, because I can't control what, as to your point, right now without the AI. If AI didn't exist, we have biased teachers going into classrooms telling kids such and such is true, choosing books for the library, going such and such is true. And that has nothing to do with the computer. That has to do with the human. And they're doing it wrong. So hand the AI that at least has access to me and you and all these other people who disagree with the teacher. And maybe we have a hope, actually, of them getting a
You
different
can't
answer.
control it. Okay, so
Right.
think of it this way. All these feelings that everybody has,
Yeah.
well, right now, I think what causes a lot of anger and a lot of fighting and a lot of frustration is the feeling that you have no control, right? Like, even, you're not going to go on social media and make any progress. You might feel good having a fight about it. You're probably talking to a bot. You're probably just adding to the AI that Elon Musk is collecting. Like, you're really lacking in power. And yeah, so what we're saying here is, guess what? Now you go on there, you have that fight with the AI, right? It's
Right.
going to be really hard to like math on their side that out of it. Nor do they want to. Google doesn't want to be the main arbiter of what is good and fair and right. They are telling us this. There's
Nobody
lots of
believes that, by the
material.
way. I shouldn't say
Look,
nobody believes that, but most people don't believe that.
I mean,
I'm just telling you what
yes,
what people believe. I'm just
look, I'm not
I'm the
saying that they're
messenger.
no, but you're right. Like, I'm not suggesting that anyone's virtuous. So I'm not going to pretend like I don't believe anyone is. I don't believe Google is. But my point is, like,
Right.
generally, it's not great for business to architect this in one way. Like, again, let's just think about this, okay? You want to make money off the most amount of people possible. Like, just always thinking shamelessly capitalistic about things is the best way. What good is it for them? Putting aside, are there maniacally controlling people that want to change how everyone thinks in the world? Yes. But they're not going to make a lot of money if they're only serving a small percentage of the country. So it's really not in their best interest, really, right now, especially like the stuff that came out recently. It does, like, do you think that's good for them? No. You get on there, you start putting your perspective in, you start having the fights, you are now contributing to something bigger. Right now, I'm not saying do the work. And actually, arguably, if you get in right now, like for instance, ChatGPT said with their marketplace, they'll start to incentivize you economically for you to create your own GPTs. Basically, what they're saying is, okay, you don't like what I have to say, create your own, right? Um, so, don't be mad. Go in there and work on it. It's not going away. So
Right.
that you are literally the only thing that we can do by keeping our kids out of this is ensure that they have no place in the future,
I
right?
understand.
It's
So
not about forcing them. It's about thinking about it.
I think it would also help if you could explain, and I know you did at the beginning, but even I was
Yeah,
like a little confused. So when it spit back pictures of the like of people who weren't black as black, okay?
yeah.
And so people were aghast. Like, how did that occur? And it's obviously easy to think, oh, it's bias. And they're trying to do when it sounds to me like it's a mistake based on, garbage in and then garbage out. Can you just explain a little bit more about the mechanics of how that happened? I think it would help a lot.
Yeah. Look, they're overcorrecting for their social beliefs. That is true, right? Like, so when I was using the example where it said, my bias, this was Google's AI said, I believe an athlete, I would think an athlete is white. And no matter how hard I tried to show that the data doesn't support that, it kept saying, but they've had people who are black have had to overcome racism. It was like irrelevant to the conversation. So, yes, that is being programmed in. There is a math associated with it. But the point is, obviously, that was an overcorrection too far. So, whatever mathematically they put in, by far, by the way, these visual products are not perfect right now. So, I think you'll find the biggest mistakes there. But yes, that's being built in. So is that problematic? Yes. Is there an opportunity for the market to work this out? Yes. How? You use it yourself, get involved, put your opinion in. But also, we haven't talked about what some other companies are doing. So there's some sort of trepidation around the meta model, which is basically to completely open source the AI, which means that all sorts of people of all sorts of backgrounds and philosophies will create their own version. So this is where it's going to start to have, it's not going to be this one big, like, this is the way it is. There will be sub GPTs, sub AI, for better or for worse, that will reflect the thinking of your community. Now, I hope that doesn't become the be all and the end all because it just becomes an echo chamber then. But I think we're thinking that this is just one set of people who are controlling us versus an opportunity to take the tools they've created. You know, when these things are things you pay for, don't pay for Google. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you have the power of, first of all, your voice, your influence, your participation, and also your non-participation. If
Mhm.
all of us stopped giving up some of our data, these companies wouldn't see this as being such an easy road. We're
It's true.
acting weak and powerless.
Well, and the other thing is, even as much as we might, hate Google, Google's not the only game in town. I mean,
No.
I think we parents feel particularly I hate to use the word, but like oppressed by it because it's Chromebooks and it's Google Classroom and it's Google Docs and it's Google Suite that their kids are using. And so it sort of dominates their lives. But for example, I'm on Brave browser right now, as just an example. I don't use Chrome anymore. They're just things I don't do. Now I still have Gmail addresses because I can't seem to pull the plug on them. I'd have to change so many things, but they're not where I do my most important things. I have Proton Mail for that. I use Signal. I don't email people half as much as I text them because you need a court order to get my text messages. So there are changes that I've made in my own behavior so that I don't have to be subject to Google's search algorithm. Like I look at their searches and they're crap. I'm sorry. I'm looking for something and I get back 20 articles that are absolutely 100% biased in one direction. And I want a little bit more broad stuff. So I use a different search engine or two different search engines and I compare and contrast and see what I'm getting. So we do have choices. It's not the only game in town. And then to your point, if we stop using the ones that
Yeah.
are that way and we use the ones that are not that way, then they'll get our business. And then Google's going to have to figure out that, we can't keep doing this because people don't like it.
Do you know, there was an article about there's a big infrastructure push because one of the obstacles to any of this AI development is actually hardware, right? It's chips, it's storage. And there was like a not very big talked about article about how OpenAI is going full on in and trying to get all these countries and companies together and create a $7 trillion push for infrastructure. But what struck me was how it said that the only obstacle to world domination by AI is storage and infrastructure. And I thought they never say data because it's like we're a sure thing. We're like slutty data givers, right? Like that should be one of the obstacles that any of these companies are considering is consent by all of us to give them what they need to get really rich off of our data. It's not, again, to suggest you just couldn't completely go off the grid, which I don't necessarily think you should or shouldn't. Like, if you want to go off the grid, great. But exactly, Deb, as you're talking about, is like, just start making choices. Look, I think don't go on social media, argue. You're just giving them data. Go on to some of these AI tools and give it some of your point of view. Go into the classroom, have the teachers prove to you how it's being used. Show your kids at home. Like, step up and take control. Every human being is unique and required for this experiment. I think, if nothing else, anger, do not suggest that you're just going to like ignore it as the approach. It will not go away, but don't allow it to grow without you.
I see. So, okay, I'm just going to read some of the comments here because the people are very passionate about this. See the whole truth says shrug. I don't hate it. I just don't think it's without its learning what it is. That curve requires insight outside of it to fathom its returns. I would agree. You need some background education, but that's a problem now. And that was a problem 10 years ago before AI. The kids were not learning knowledge. The knowledge-based curriculum went away in 1983. So that's been a problem since long before AI. I am actually genuinely worried that we worry so much about AI, we're forgetting about the fact that they're not learning to read and they're not learning math anyway. So they're two separate problems. And if you're worried about that, then you got to find another way for your kid to learn to read and write. It's not the AI's fault. Now I think David is talking to me here. David Goodnow, he's saying she's wrong. In fact, AT et cetera, cell phone data, including raw recordings of conversations. Only your own government requires a warrant, no one else's, and not businesses. You're saying that they're recording my conversation and selling it to people for commercial purposes? Because I'm pretty sure nothing in my T&Cs says that they can do that they can that the private corporation can take a raw recording of my conversation and sell it to anybody. As for my text messages, same thing. I've asked AT&T, can you see my text messages when I write something? And I was told that it's quite an involved process to do, and they certainly have no commercial need to have to take a look at all my text messages. I'm worried about my government doing that. I don't want them to do it, but as far as commercial value, I can't see it. Maybe I'm wrong. See, the whole truth says my wife should get paid to correct their translate errors. It's ridiculous how much they get wrong. We know this. That's why if you speak to it more, it might get better. And then King Elvis says AI can never take over because what people will tell it not to tell the truth about anything. Well, they're not the only ones who have control over it. So this is what she's saying, that AI learns from the data that it churns up from the internet. If it's on the internet, it's what it's gobbling up for food and to learn. And so if it's out there somewhere, if you put it there, if I put it there, it's using that as food too. It doesn't know how to segregate out, don't gobble up this information. It came from the wrong kind of people. I mean, theoretically it could, but it would run out of data very quickly if it did that, because we don't all agree. We literally don't all agree with each other, even at an individual level. So am I understanding this correctly? Am I translating correctly?
Yeah. And, I think a lot of our attention would be well used to worry, just to be much more on top of the data. Like, if I could leave you with one thing, because the data fuels it. So one conversation is get in there, start participating, start looking at it, start giving it feedback, start using it, start getting comfort with it. But the data piece is really something we're not paying enough attention to. And I really recommend, like, it's not to freak everyone out. Again, like, I'm pro tech, like, you make your own decisions. But I think if you take the time and look at some of these privacy policies, you'll really start to understand what you're just giving up. I mean, I was looking at one company's, I won't call them out specifically because everybody has this, but it said that they collect thermodynamic and olfactory data, and I don't even know what that is, right?
That's
Like,
from
what they're getting
what smells
smell?
are in
I
their
know
room.
that, but
Yeah.
like, how are they getting what smell data? Literally, it was one of my like entertainment apps. Like, what is it going to be like popcorn smells? We would be very well served to participate at that level. I think so. I was reading recently, and this is the kind of thing where my family just goes, "Oh my god." I was reading in the magazine produced by NATO about cognitive warfare, and NATO is creating a cognitive warfare framework right now. The good news is it's so simple to understand, right? Like, we are vulnerable, currently being controlled by what we see. And I don't even mean that in like a sort of deep state dystopian way. I literally mean like you go onto Instagram and algorithmically you are being sort of biased towards something happening that everybody's talking about, right? TikTok, whatever. We'd be much better served right now to work with our kids to question everything because we are so swayed. We're swayed into political arguments, personal arguments, fights. You know, I was watching, I guess, on the news. They were talking about, oh, Elon Musk, he's the best thing since free speech, and I was like, free speech is the best thing for somebody who bought Twitter for AI, right? So if you believe that he's doing this for, it's great that he has a moderate belief, you know, but if you believe he's doing what he's doing just because it's like free speech, I've got a bridge to sell you, right? It is a
It's a
fantastic,
huge moneymaker.
right? It's a fantastic
Yeah.
piece of data that is created with Twitter. Fantastic, right? Usually has like a fact, something social, an emotion. So the more you believe he's doing it for the better good, the more information he's got to create AI. It doesn't mean that's nefarious, it's just the truth. That would be a much better use of all of our time to understand really what's happening and then, you know, start working in where you can have some control.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Well, so the big takeaway then is get involved, have conversations with AI, give it your perspective, talk to your kids about how to question what they see, teach them how AI works, because chances are they're not doing that in school. You know, they may not know, right? I mean, I didn't know, and a lot of people don't know, and probably the teachers don't know because they're too busy focusing on pronouns and other things, and there are biases out there. But
Cool.
to me, the thing is, I guess what I'm starting to like about this idea is I feel like it could be the antidote. Like you said,
Yeah.
that if we can't go and change all these human minds to behave differently, and if we can't shut the whole thing down and start over from scratch, then maybe training the machines to be more, uh, free thinking
Disruptive.
and
Yeah.
disruptive and all that will, push those dud teachers into the corner where they realize, like, crap, I can't get
Yeah.
away with it anymore. The AI is correcting me. The AI is saying that what I'm saying is, questionable and not really true and doesn't align with the history. So then the last thing I want to say though, or question I want to ask you is, doesn't it then also seem like it's very, very important for those of us who care about this and care about history being maintained to make sure that we are putting things onto the internet for the AI to
Really
crawl,
good point.
that we want it to crawl. So you want it to know as much about Thomas Sowell as it does about Kimberly Crenshaw? Make sure that somebody's got a project to digitize everything that Thomas Sowell has ever written, is legally, obviously, steal his copyrighted stuff, but figure out how to make sure that everything that you think ought to be digitized is. And
You know,
then
that's a really good point.
it's
Really,
gonna
like,
it can't help but find it. It's just going gobble, 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 and it's gonna feed it into that. And then, like you said, when we push back more, the companies that write the software that make these programs are going to have to think about how they hire people. Eventually, they'll have to go back to their little, tech bros who are back
yeah,
there, 30 years old in their hoodies or whatever. And, they're gonna have to say, guys, 90% of the queries are coming back wrong. That's not right. What are you doing? This is totally biased, like what happened last week, where people are getting in arguments with Gemini, like cut it out. What are you doing? So eventually they're going to have to say, like, there's only so long you can fool people. And
100%.
they're going to have to either hire some new people to do it differently, or they're going to have to change their attitude or their math.
You know, I think like the culmination of your point, which is a really good one, is like think about what you're putting out there. Like I think right now there's a lot of frustration and arguments and personal attacks, and people like to fight it out versus like everybody's got a really unique, interesting opinion that comes from their background, where they live, what they do. Like we are all valuable as human beings. I mean, I don't want to sound too like weird about it and all like, but the truth is this is the reckoning. every human being in their uniqueness contributes. Like, the AI doesn't want all the same people saying the same things. It doesn't help it doesn't help it become smarter, right? So you all have something to contribute. Think about contributing. Think about, in the news, Reddit's going public. Why? Because it's high quality information, and Google's paid Reddit $60 million a year to access it. We can have all
That
sorts
means
of
every
conversations.
Redditor now is like, already.
Right. Exactly. And so I think, like, you're right. Like, think about what you're contributing. If you've got wisdom to share, and again, it doesn't have to just be like put it out there and hold your, cross your fingers. When you create these custom GPTs, and I can't speak to whether other platforms allow this, I've just been using it on Chat GPT. You can upload your own knowledge. So I, for instance, created a data privacy GPT, and I just streamlined it for the social media companies that kids and parents tend to care most about. And I made sure that I uploaded the specific knowledge. You can upload articles, you can upload anything. So again, it's not even just saying, like, I hope on the internet some bot takes my thinking. You can actually create your own GPTs and upload your expertise. So
I
it is.
have one. I
You
didn't
do,
create it. But I have this. I have Alex AI.
right?
This is
There you
this
go.
is for people who don't know him, this is Alex Epstein. He is a philosopher, and he wrote The Case for Fossil Fuel, amongst other things. So he's definitely somebody pushing back against the Green New Deal. Now, that's not to say that he thinks we should just, not do anything. He's just taking, the all of the above approach, and he pushes back on some of the mythology around climate extremism and so forth. But he's got, questions in here. He's got some GPTs that are kind of already written, but then it's like, ask me a question. And all the knowledge that he's amassed from his years of research into climate science and philosophy and everything has been poured into his own little
Isn't that
AI,
cool?
so that if somebody wants to learn about this and they use this product, they're going to learn a lot more than they just go out to Google. So Google has competition. These other things have competition, and eventually there'll be thousands of these.
And what you're pointing out is something that's important here. These are not being created by coding. So what you're saying now is the expertise required to create a custom experience comes simply from knowledge and setting parameters, right? AI will be able to write code. So coders aren't really as important anymore, but being able to collect question, like, all of a sudden everybody here, right,
Right.
can be an expert. Everybody's an expert in something.
Right, that's right. And so Texas Chick says, will the personal AI, I think, be edited by a different person? I think we were saying is no, that's the beauty of it. It doesn't go there. They don't have a staff of millions of people to sit there and edit everything that you put onto the internet. And so if you put it out there, you're expert. Now, garbage in, garbage out. There's a lot of garbage on the internet. So it's chewing that up too. If everybody participates, then the likelihood of the high quality stuff and the differences of opinion and so forth goes up, because there is not an editorial staff. Unlike the New York Times and CNN and
Yes, yes, yes,
MSNBC,
yes.
the AI is just like, the answer is this, or here's an answer. I found this from this source. I found this from
And
that source.
sometimes it follows its master's rules, and sometimes it does something crazy. And again, crazy is going to be unexpected. So this kind of chaos will, I think, break it open. And guess what? It feels a lot easier to get mad at a machine, doesn't it? So, like, whereas we think, oh gosh, I don't want to get her upset, we can all be like, damn, this machine. So yeah, this is going to be very interesting. And I think that nobody is lacking in power here. And that's what's really cool. You don't have to go take a class. You can fire up any of these when you get home and when you get out after we speak, and, like, start playing. There's no mistakes.
Yeah, I think that's, this is certainly, you've certainly demystified that. Okay, here's one last question. For Shannon, what does she think of what is this? The Took of Rabbits R1? Did you mean the tool? The look?
It's not the phone, is it?
I don't know. Can you clarify? See the whole truth? I'm
Is
not
this,
sure
is
we
this
understand.
the phone that's just it's an AI phone?
The tool. The tool. Is it an AI phone? Like what are you talking about? Rabbits R1. I don't know what that is. Do you know what that is?
I don't know what that is. I thought it might be the phone, but I might be wrong.
Okay. And then here's another question. If you can clarify, Step Down says, should we jump on the AI train while it's still in the station? Seems like we really do not want to miss this one. Should we start prompt engineering, for example?
Yes, I think a lot of people having conversations about this haven't tried it. And I think there's a bit of trepidation, but literally you just go on and start playing. Look, not everything has to be serious. I even created my own GPT that answers every question with an 80s song lyric in its response. Right. And so I just sit there for like hours just saying, like, why is my husband clean? Or why do my kids don't do this? So like I think getting used to trying it.
You mean like how how Instagram became a thing for cat videos? So like
Yeah,
AI is going
yeah.
to be a thing for like goofy song lyric
Yeah, it literally is
compilations.
like, "Hey, wake me up before you go, girl, and don't forget to have breakfast." And I mean, the
It's
thing
funny.
is, I think you will not understand any of this until you do it. There's nothing required, by the way. It's not like, okay, tonight I have to like deal with this thing. You just go on and start asking it questions and start to see the iterative part. The other thing we didn't talk about too is that this is not a human, and that's really important. I think it's something to teach your kids. There's a tendency to feel like this is a humanized exchange. It doesn't mean you should be a jerk about it, but I think you shouldn't feel any sort of trepidation to ask a question or disagree with it because it sounds like it's a human. And that's like a whole nother discussion about our maybe
You mean
concern about like
it's okay that I yell at Alexa when she starts talking and I don't want her to be talking? Like this happens all the time where we'll get a notification and so we're like, all right, pause the movie, Alexa, notification. And it's like, you're almost out of cream soda. Would you like me to order you some more cream soda? It's been a long time since your last order for cream soda. And I will be sitting there like, you made stop the movie for that, you stupid bitch. Like yelling
I
at this
know.
stupid machine. And my husband goes, if they ever do come to get us, they're coming for you first. Because I'm so mean to Alexa.
I mean, I feel like this is a really interesting another topic for another day because there's a real balance too between like, yeah, please don't put something controversial in there because like you might have someone at your door,
Yeah.
but balancing the way we act towards this technology says a lot about us as humans. So there is this exchange that is about our humanity, obviously not the bots. But on the
Yeah.
flip side, I have even noticed kids feeling a bit like, oh, am I going to make it mad if I disagree with it or
They've
you know?
probably seen
So
Megan. They've seen the movie
oh
Megan.
my gosh, loved Megan. But look,
That's
none
what
of
it
this
is. They're
makes
like,
any
is it going to attack me?
yeah, you gotta do it. Just get in there, play with it, and then you start to have, I think, maybe a different perspective. But again, it doesn't minimize any concerns about education. I think they're all legitimate, but I think we now have maybe a way to express them that's productive.
Okay, so I got some clarification. The software
Oh,
inside the R1 is the real story. Rabbit's operating system called Rabbit OS and the AI tech, rather than a chat GPT like large language model Rabbit, says the OS is based on a large action model. I am lost, so I don't know what that is.
yeah, I
A
think
sort of
there's 2 points about
universal controller for apps. We wanted to find a universal solution, just like a large language models. It's the best hands-on there is, being quietly unseen because it destroyed Apple and the big tech corp for I don't know what that is. So,
so
any
I feel like I know a bit about this, not enough to engage, but I will check it out. And I think there's another point here, which is an important one, which is what we're talking about. The world of this is much bigger than just these chat apps. These are called large language models because they're actually parsing the language that's in the internet. Obviously, the image ones is images, but this is like just the tip of the iceberg. There are going to be many different ways in which these applications become other things and are used in different ways. But again, it doesn't change the data in, processing, application out, but just recognize too that it's so much bigger. Um, and that's not a scary thing. That's an exciting thing. And it will be I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name because I don't have my glasses on, but it will be disruptive. There is disruptiveness that to that point being made that these big companies are going to feel really uncomfortable with, right?
right.
Because just like Microsoft lost its dominance, some of these companies, like, a few missteps by Google, and I think some of these smaller companies, this is going to be disruptive for them as well. It's not like, again, there's some masters of the universe that are just going to be like, hey, everybody do this.
Right, right. And Lewis says what I think we've been saying, I just don't think there's a way to turn it off at this point. Change your behavior because you think it will make you happy or not because you think it will make a difference. There's just too much data out there already.
I think that you can't make a difference in the sense of stopping it. You can make a difference in making it different. Like you absolutely can. I mean, look, in such a small way, whether it's like outing a company for its data practices or talking to your school about not signing a contract with a data provider, like every person in this ecosystem, and that's the way we're looking at this, an ecosystem has a very important part to play. So, there is empowerment there.
Mhm.
We're not going to stop it, but I don't think that's the point. And by the way, it's been happening for over a decade. So
Yeah, well, that's the thing I've been telling parents is like you do realize you've been surveilled already. Like this has
yeah,
been going on. There are mountains of data. That's how they built the AI they've got. So it's yeah. I mean, I would agree. But anything that we didn't cover that you want to finish off with or
I just hope there's optimism and paying attention. I think this is a really democratic experiment, believe it or not. Like I always felt a little bit like an outsider everywhere that I've been in the technology industry because maybe for a variety of reasons. I think we have allowed this elitism, this insular nature, this mythology of the hoodie, and to exist, and that's our fault, right? Technology is not a destination; it's a journey. As human beings, we are unique. So I do believe that if all of us start going, I don't know about that, that opt in or this or that, in addition to working on this and trying it, I think we can start to be empowered. It really does not exist without us. I mean, it is that simple. You cannot have an artificial intelligence like infrastructure without the people, right? We are it. And that's probably the thing right now I'm most disappointed about. I don't think enough people think that way.
yeah, I think there's a lot of fear. I think there's a lot of things coming to a head at the same time. And
Yeah.
so, that coupled with Hollywood, that coupled with the way that AI gets depicted and has been discussed in sci-fi and in, dystopia and all this kind of stuff, people get very nervous about the potential in the wrong hands and with megalomania and we see that. But I think the thing that gives me hope that you've taught tonight or certainly that I've learned is that no one person or group of people controls it. It's literally taking everything that's on the internet and just pulling it through. Yes, pulling it through applications that they write, but we have the option to use or not use the applications. If there are applications that are used on our behalf, like in medicine, for example, we need to start asking questions like, hey, doctor, are you using a diagnostic tool to diagnose me? Or are you using
Yeah.
your own brain and your own knowledge? And make them tell you the answer. If they say, well, I actually use this tool and here's why I use it, and then you can make a decision. But you need to know to ask that. If you stay on the sidelines and you just go, like AI, and you don't
Yeah, yeah.
familiarize yourself, you won't be able to make these judgment calls.
Or feel like you're not smart enough or you're not
No.
like I think we've really learned to feel very disempowered, like, okay, all we can do is argue and be pissed off, like nobody cares what we think anyway, and that's really
Right.
not true. I mean, if you see any movement, I mean, it could be something silly like any movement that like everybody jumped on the bandwagon and something changed, it's no different. Like, you can ask that question and listen, if you're not teaching your kids that, then that's where we've lost. Like,
Right.
don't be afraid to say, does that app take what kind of information is required? Do I have to put my birth date in? Do I have to consent?
Right.
I don't know many people who do that. And if
Right.
we all did that, so much would be different
Well,
right now.
and no one is putting a gun to anybody's head and saying, don't teach your kids how to grow a vegetable. Don't teach your kids how to survive without AI.
Yeah.
So, all the people come to me and say, but my kid won't know anything and they won't know how to do anything. And if there's an EMP, then we're all doomed. Or like, and whose fault will that be? Like, and they're human beings between the child and the dependence on the machine. And they're supposed to be called parents. And so it's really incumbent upon us to say, I think this is great that you're becoming like a little future, master of your own domain when it comes to using tech. And they do need to learn that, but it doesn't follow that they have to learn it from tech at all times. They have to know how to
Agree.
use tech, but they don't have to be like this is how I'm learning history. You know, they can like pick up a book, but that's still up to us. Like we still, I tell people that on the channel all the time. And where are you in this picture? You know, like you still have to take responsibility for making sure that
100%.
your child has the survival skills, that if God forbid there's a power outage for longer than a day, they're not like, I don't know anything because the chat
How will they be
GPT
able
is
to think
them.
about the application in the future if they don't think creatively,
They
right?
have
Like if
to.
you're not like, don't, I think we have to stop there. They have to question everything, question authority, question ideas, question everything, or they won't be able to question, to create what's next, because we don't know what's next, right?
Right.
So we need them to be open-minded about it.
Right. And have the vocabulary. Like this is where my snobbery comes in, that like, you know, at least by age 10, you know, have it like a certain amount of basic understanding of things to know what you don't know. So that when you
Exactly.
do approach these things, like, I got to check that out. That if we can just get our kids to a place where they understand that what they know is a tiny, tiny fraction compared to what they don't know. So there's that humility. There's the sense that not, you know, they aren't necessarily going to know off the top of their head if the thing is right. So they're going to have to go check. And
Yep.
then, and that's a skill we all had to learn. We just learned it minus the AI. That's it.
Yep.
We all had to learn
100%.
it. So, well, I'm very grateful that you came and spent this
Thank
time with us
you.
because I've learned a lot. I feel better. I was much less optimistic before this conversation. I still have some trepidation about the generative AI stuff, but to your point, we just, you know, we got to put more good stuff in there and ask it questions and make corrections. And well, good. So where can people find you to read more about, you know, these kinds of things and learn more from your expertise?
Yeah, so I try to put as much information as possible on my website, AI for Families. And
Okay.
on that website, you can also sign up for my newsletter. And I would love to hear from people as well. Like again, this is a conversation, and I want to hear all of it. I don't have all the answers. You know, I'm hoping to give some thoughts about how to think, but I don't know what
Yeah.
to think. None of
Yeah.
us do, and
Right.
don't let anyone tell you otherwise. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
I really
I think
appreciate this conversation.
I appreciate it too. Thank you so much. And everybody, please, again, you know, if you haven't already hit the like button, hit the like, share it with somebody else who is concerned about AI, or, you know, to give them a little bit of a white pill on it and get them involved. We want people who are curious and skeptical and so on to be involved in it. So then we won't be powerless. So that's the way to go. But thank you so much. And
Thank you.
we'll probably be back again with another show at some point. I have a feeling. Thanks, guys.
Excellent.
Have a good one.